Of all the, there's a lot of things obviously we could wrestle with this morning, but maybe the core thought we'll wrestle with is, what if our identity wasn't something that we had to conjure up or create or produce and therefore had to protect it? Rather, what if our identity is something found securely in Jesus and therefore a platform for us to give and even die for others? Some of you have heard me tell this story before. When I was a college student, my staff worker, Elise, I spent a lot of time at her house, and one of my close friends, her dad was a locksmith. So we decided one time when Elise was out of town, that'd be really fun to break into her house. So we picked her lock and we went in, and we were just goofing around. We just decided to move furniture around, and we moved all of her pictures around so they were in different places, but subtle stuff. Like, we didn't want it to, stalker serial killer stuff. We didn't want her to notice it immediately. We wanted it to just feel off, so we'd move pictures around, and we got into her cabinet. Food's really important to her, and we got in her cabinet, and we carefully took labels off cans and put them on other cans and just put them back in there, so that for months and months she would come back and try to make food. She'd want to make beans for dinner, and she got corn, and just what's happening? And was that picture always there? What's going on here? I know. It's very confusing. We need labels. They're important. They help us identify what a thing is, right? If I came up here and I put a bottle of apple juice in front of you without a label and a bottle of Pine Sol or cleaner, it'd be hard for you to know the difference, right? When we don't know what a thing is, we don't know what to use it for, and we might use it for the wrong thing. We have this friend, David, who lived in a house with a bunch of guys for a lot of years, and any of you who've lived in community know, if it's out in the open, you just think it's for communal consumption. And he saw a drink that, someone had already started drinking but hadn't finished drinking, and he thought that looks good, and he didn't have a label on it, so he picked it up and he smelled it, and he thought, it smells a little bit like pine, but I don't know, looks like a soda of some kind. So he drank it, and he drank lots of it, ignoring the fact that it smelled a lot like pine. And he drank so much of it, it turned out to be some sort of cleaner, that he had to go to the hospital and get his stomach pumped because, it didn't have a label and he didn't know what to use it for. Our ability to appropriately identify a thing, to know what a thing is, affects what we do with it. And when we get it wrong, it can be bad, even deadly. I think the same is true with people. And the way we come to our identity, what we most identify ourselves with, it's important. It impacts the way we live and that we move in the world. There's a guy named James Carse wrote a book called Finite and Infinite Games, and the idea was made popular by another writer more recently called Simon Sinek. And James Carse's idea is that humans play two kinds of games: finite games and infinite games. Finite games are something like Monopoly or basketball. They have rules, they have a beginning, they have an end. You know clearly who your opponent is and what it's going to take to finish the game and to win over them, And then we have other games that are infinite games, and they're more open-ended. There's not an opponent to beat. It's more about playing for the sake of playing. I've never played Minecraft, but when I've heard people talk about it, it sounds more like an infinite game than a finite game, like building and exploring for the sake of doing that, And he talks about these two kind of games that we play. And finite games are kind of heads I win, tails you lose kind of system. And I feel like, we can see marks and attributes of that kind of game being played in the passage when we look at someone like Judas, who's making a decision prompted by the devil to betray Jesus for what we'll come to find out is a certain amount of money. There's all kinds of authority being exchanged in the passage, and people are trying to figure out how to use it and what to do with it, and whether or not to use it for themselves or to follow Jesus's lead. And in an economy of win-lose, what we know about sports and competitions is that in that kind of economy, we get titles or awards or plaques or those little blue ribbons that you get when you beat that other kid at the race when you're little. And titles are something that are public, and we hang them on our walls, and we want to be called by our titles, and they line us up against other people, and they show that we're special somehow or better than. And once you win a title, then of course the job is to protect that title, right? This economy of win-lose, it's around us every day. Think about the advice culture that we're swimming in. It's sort of a self-help space on steroids out in social media. And it plays on the win-lose culture. It carries with it at its core this idea that your life could be better. Like all of these people out here that we're showing you, if you would just do this thing that I'm giving you advice to do. So underneath that is maybe this subtle sort of like, don't be a loser, be a winner. Here's how to do it. Have you ever seen the Progressive Insurance commercials with Dr. Rick? He's like the guy that's trying to teach you not how to be like your parents. It's like the mockumentary commercials, where it's like he's walking around with a group of clients sort of in everyday life trying to give them tips. And every now and then you get the like just him talking to the camera, telling you, what his wishes are for these people who are getting to middle-aged life now. And there's one scene where he's with them and he's got a giant flip chart and he's drawn the image of a cell phone on. And he says, okay, this is the situation. We're in a movie. You need to turn your cell phone off. Does anybody know how to do that? Does anybody know how to silence their phone? And he like circles it on the flip chart for them. He's like, this is how you do it. Or he's like in the kitchen with a guy who's got a plumber there working on it. And the guy keeps giving the plumber advice. And he's like, just remember, you're not here to help the plumber. You hired the plumber to help you. He doesn't need your advice, and he just follows them around. And he's giving them life advice about how to not become like their parents. He's teaching them how to pronounce words like quinoa and telling them they've got too many decorative pillows on their sofas. It doesn't feel welcoming for people. The underlying message is that parents turn into these weird, out-of-touch losers. Let us help you not be like them. Instructions about how to navigate and win in a finite framework for life are around us every day. And I wonder, what are the subtle ways that this economy of gain and win can infect our own lives and our own spirituality and our own following of Jesus? You think about something like the midlife crisis. There's a few of us, me included here, who are in that sort of middle space in life. And it's a time in life that people begin to sort of look around. Often it's, people who have had kids and raised kids and they're out of the house and life is changing and they're on their second career or something. And you're sort of looking around and you're wondering, like, is this significant enough? Does it measure up to the people around me? Am I winning at life? Am I losing at life? I don't really know. That's what creates the existential crisis a lot of times in midlife. Temptation is to circle the wagons, to focus in on self and on family, on kids, on success, on future. And it can be tempting to think that the sacrificial life is something that we did when we were young. To worry when we look at our peers that maybe living that way causes us to get behind somehow in life. And it's tempting to want to have more instead of wanting to give more. Think about cancel culture. I think that's a feature of finite game win-lose thinking. If a person disagrees with you or they don't reciprocate enough with you, or it feels like they're just sort of a drain, or they just sort of bum you out all the time when you're with them. And you only have so many resources in life and you don't want to waste them. Your life would be better, stronger, happier without them. And so we dismiss people from our lives. I don't know, maybe you get too concerned about how your kids are measuring up or how you're deploying the latest parenting technique, or in the economy of gain and win, I think marriages can become a competition. They become a struggle of power, a cycle of blame and need. And friendships have scorecards and who takes the most initiative and who's given the most and who goes to the most parties and social invites. And do I feel valued and seen in this friendship? And maybe in microchurch life or our missionary community, it's if we're living in a finite system, maybe we go when it's convenient or when it serves us, instead of living from a place of sacrificial commitment to some group of people Jesus has called us to. On teams, we become concerned with, is my input considered valuable? And does my voice matter here? And are my ideas accepted? And is my idea the one that gets used? And when we experience relational offenses, whether they're small things or incredibly difficult things like betrayals, we start to make our circles smaller and weigh the cost of letting new people into our life, going deep again with a new group, and measuring if we have the internal resources to do it again if it goes poorly. When we strive to produce an identity in a win-lose economy, then like titles in sports, we have to defend that identity, that way of life. With each year that passes, we have this identity that we need validated and that we can't let anything threaten it. And we start to live life on our own terms. And maybe at worst, we become Judas. We betray the one who came to make us clean and walk away entirely. Or Or maybe we try to negotiate with Jesus about, on whose terms will we live life with him or with others. And really that's the antithesis to what we've seen and said about Jesus in this passage. We've already said this, but Jesus knew that he came from the Father and he was returning to the Father. And this allowed him to love them to the very end, to get up from where he was seated, to take off his robe, to put on the towel of the servant, and to lower himself and wash their feet, including his friend Judas, who he knew would betray him. In the finite game framework, identity is all power, success, happiness, fulfillment, and strength. But in the framework of the kingdom, Jesus shows us that an identity rooted in the Father contains both strength and immense vulnerability. A firm identity in Jesus, it frees us from slavery to the games of the world. An identity firmly rooted in him, it isn't a title we've earned or created, it's a title that we've inherited. That title, that identity comes with a way of life that we get to step into and uphold and give away, not something we have to produce or to protect. That identity comes with authority and power and agency. That's all true. We know that Jesus shares his authority with us, but it also frees us to live with immense vulnerability, to open our lives to struggle and pain and suffering and betrayal. An inherited identity means we get to live from the overflow of belonging to God, who himself became a servant. God himself became a servant and cleaned our dirty feet. The image he presents at the end of this passage is that the result of upholding that inherited way of life is that we will be blessed, blessedness. He doesn't present an image of entitlement or white knuckling and gritting our teeth as we lose what we want in order to do what he wants, but of submitting to the good, right reign of Jesus, which then becomes gratitude and thanksgiving and just awe that the God of the universe not only came to us in Jesus, but came to us as the lowest kind of servant, so that every filth, every brokenness, every wrong could be made right through the washing of feet, through his death on the cross. And what that should produce is a life that is overflowing with thankfulness, that allows us to freely serve, to get down low and to become servants like him. And he says if we'll do this, we'll be blessed. He presents this picture of blessedness, of flourishing. Andy Crouch has this little tiny book that I really love called Strong and Weak. I think there's an image. We'll put it up. We won't stay on this long, but I just wanted to give you this framework quick. He has this proposition from, Paul's wrestling with the thorn in his side, and she's saying, my power is made perfect in your weakness. That part of how God has designed us to flourish is that when we are equal parts strong and equal parts weak, when we are equal parts having authority and agency in some sort of creative act in the redemptive work of God, and equal parts vulnerable, taking risks, exposing our lives, lowering ourselves for other people, that is where we flourish as humans. And anytime that gets out of balance, there's a lack of flourishing in our life. So just to tell you, on the bottom left, he says we start from the place of safety where babies shouldn't have authority of any kind. They're still like punching themselves in the face, and we don't want them exposed to the elements. We don't leave them outside when it's too cold and stuff like that. They start from a place of safety, but that quadrant becomes, when you're an adult, if you're in that quadrant, what it is a withdrawal from your responsibility as a human to live with agency in the world. And if we're all strength and no vulnerability, what that turns into is exploitation, injustice. He says vulnerability can never be done away with. We can never get rid of weakness. All we do is displace it onto other people when we live with all strength and no vulnerability. Vulnerability without strength is a place of suffering. Brian talked about the Philippines this morning. Abject poverty is a version of that, where there's no choices. And Andy Crouch, he posits this theory that when we live in both of those places, that we experience human flourishing. And I think the authority we have, it's only the authority that Jesus has given us, right? We have no authority of our own. It all comes under his authority and his lordship and his reign. And because of him, we can both use authority that we've been given without being corrupt, and we can lay our lives down to be servants without fearing that the well in our lives will dry up or that we'll lose out somehow, because we do it under his lordship and his reign. N.T. Wright, he talks about in the Gospels, part of what Jesus is doing is that he's rigorously re-inhabiting the entire Jewish tradition as we see him in so many ceremonial pieces like this one leading up to the Passover. And he's redirecting this vision of what would it look like if God was in charge. And I think the foot washing is one of those images. If we lived on his terms and not our own terms, it might look like a people so secure in their place in God's family and his ongoing work that they regularly and freely lower themselves to serve others. And Jesus says to us that if we will follow his example, it will result in blessing. Something N.T. Wright describes as the inauguration of the kingdom, the goodness, the rightness, the shalom, the right leadership of God at work in our lives, flourishing as God intended it. His infinite kingdom breaking into our finite zero-sum game. Because we belong to him, we come from him, we're going to be reunited with him. We too can step out of the competition of this finite game. We too can persevere in getting low, in giving away all that we are and all that we have with a kind of reckless generosity. So I wonder, what does it look like for us to wash each other's feet, right? Maybe if there's going to be music or something, you can come up. At the end, he says, now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. And as we come under his lordship, it's one thing to know what he did, and it's another thing to figure out what does it look like for us, now that he has washed our feet, to turn and wash one another's feet. If we come on his terms, it looks like us washing each other's feet. Maybe that's in conversation and patience and curiosity. I don't know. Maybe that's has to do with reconciliation, being willing to go first when a relationship is strained and to try and figure out how to make it right. Maybe it's about believing the best in one another, being patient, persevering. When community feels weak and you wish you were getting more from it, persevering anyway out of a sacrificial kind of love and commitment to a people Jesus has called you to. Maybe it's finding ways to give to and strengthen the family of missionaries. Maybe it's simple things like sending a text to someone and checking in with them, encouraging them. Maybe it's being willing to have that hard conversation that Jesus is prompting, even though you feel like it's going to take time and it's probably going to be uncomfortable and maybe you don't like hard conversations or conflict. Or maybe it's about confession and absolution, that hard work of getting in front of each other and really talking about the ways that we're coming up short in our life and being able to be seen for all of our mess, and the act of seeing someone else for all of their mess and offering the forgiveness of God in a conversation like that. I don't know. I wonder, what does it look like for us to wash one another's feet? I'm someone who's really driven by a success failure framework. Anytime you've heard me talk, so you know that, I measure myself in success and failure. I'm a really competitive person. If I'm driving a long haul trip like to Georgia or something, I'll race someone down the road just because I'm bored, and I won't tell you the stories about it, but I've done it a lot. There are ways I let my identity get rooted in the finite game. And I'm one of those people at that midlife point. And it's tempting to look around and to wonder, if I'm behind somehow, to measure my choices over the past 20 years and to wonder, where has it gotten me? And that sort of thinking, it does lead to this desire to focus on your own life. And I constantly hear Jesus often reminding me not to circle the wagons, to not make my life about myself, and to keep living on his terms. And honestly, guys, when I am asking those questions, it's evidence that I'm out of touch with the God who washes our feet. It's evidence that I'm out of touch with the flourishing that he's produced in my life. In the moments when I have been willing to submit to his authority and his leadership and to learn from him as a rabbi. And as Tommy comes to lead us in communion this morning, I wonder, what about you? Where is your life looking more like a finite game? How is Jesus calling you out of self-preservation into a renewed generosity of giving your life away for each other and for the people that he's called you to? Maybe you need to let Jesus wash your feet this morning. Is there some specific thing that he's been asking you to do that looks like washing feet and you've just been avoiding it or putting it off or pushing away that nudge from him? For whatever reason, convenience, because you're tired, you don't want to think about it, it feels hard. I don't know, is there something he's been asking you to do that looks like washing feet that you've been putting off? This morning, as Tommy leads us in communion, I think we need to get our feet washed by him again this morning. He says, a person who's already had a bath doesn't need to be clean. Those of you who belong to Jesus, you have been cleansed by him. But as we journey in the world with our own sin and the sin of the world, our feet get dirty. So let's get our feet washed this morning so that we can get freed up again from the slavery of identity making into the blessedness of washing feet.